It all started on a quiet Saturday morning. I was in the backyard, trimming hedges, enjoying the rare time off when I saw a moving truck pull up to the house next door. A tall, dark-haired man hopped out, exuding an unmistakable confidence. His grin was wide as he barked orders to the movers, his voice carrying over to my yard. As I watched, he glanced over, giving a casual wave and a nod. I nodded back, curious but not overly interested. New people came and went, and until recently, the house next door had been vacant for nearly a year. A few minutes later, my wife, Emma, joined me outside, carrying a basket of fresh laundry to hang. She was a natural beauty, with an easy laugh and a down-to-earth warmth that made everyone feel at home. It was one of the things I loved most about her. She'd always been loyal and level-headed, qualities that kept us steady through 10 years of marriage. Emma noticed the new neighbor almost immediately. "Look who finally moved in," she said, nodding toward the man. "Seems like he's interesting." She laughed softly, a note of intrigue in her tone that I hadn't heard before. "Yeah," I said, watching him wrestle a large box off the truck. "Let's hope he's quiet." Emma chuckled and went back to hanging up the clothes, but I couldn't help noticing her stealing a few glances in his direction. I didn't think much of it. People look, and anyway, she and I had a strong bond. Jealousy was never my thing. Later that evening, there was a neighborhood barbecue, a small tradition our street held to welcome new arrivals. Emma was excited to attend, so we headed over together. The evening was casual and warm. A few neighbors gathered around a makeshift grill. Dylan, the new guy, immediately stole the show. He had a charm about him that was hard to ignore. His laugh, his quick wit, the way he could make people feel like the center of his world. It wasn't long before he was surrounded by a few neighbors, Emma among them, laughing at his stories. I joined in briefly, introducing myself. "Hey, I'm Tom," I said, offering a handshake. His grip was firm, almost overly so, as if he was trying to prove something. "So, you just moved in?" "Yep," he said with a smile. "Dylan Lewis, all settled in now." He looked over at Emma, his gaze lingering just a bit too long. "You're married to this lucky guy, huh?" He gave Emma a playful grin that made her blush, and it didn't sit well with me. "Yeah, 10 years, she said, her voice full of pride. I felt a little tug of irritation at how easily she'd been drawn in by him, but again, I dismissed it. Emma was just being polite. Dylan was just a guy who liked attention. It didn't mean anything. Throughout the night, Dylan managed to keep Emma laughing, tossing out playful comments and not-so-subtle compliments. I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. It was a strange, unwelcome feeling, but I kept a cool face. Emma and I trusted each other implicitly, and I wasn't about to let some smooth-talking newcomer make me doubt her. As the night wore on, I had a few more beers than I intended, but Dylan seemed stone-cold sober, watching everyone with those sharp, calculating eyes. A small part of me wondered if he was enjoying the attention a little too much. I shook the thought off. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous husband, the overthinker. Eventually, as the party wound down, we made our way home. Emma seemed in high spirits, laughing about Dylan's wild stories and his plans to renovate his place. I listened with a half-hearted smile, but a tightness had settled in my chest. Even if it was just innocent fun, I couldn't deny that Dylan's arrival had unsettled me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Back at home, Emma thanked me for taking her to the barbecue, planting a quick kiss on my cheek before heading upstairs to get ready for bed. I lingered in the kitchen, going over the events of the night in my mind. I couldn't quite shake the image of Dylan's lingering gaze or Emma's laughter ringing out just a little louder than usual. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Emma was my wife, loyal to the core, and I had no reason to worry. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. An uneasy knot of doubt twisting in my stomach. It was the kind of feeling that lingered, like a dark cloud, barely noticeable at first but impossible to ignore once it took hold. In the days that followed, I tried to brush off the strange tension. I wanted to forget about Dylan, to go back to normal. But fate had other plans, and little did I know this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Dylan seemed to be everywhere. No matter what time of day it was, he'd pop up. I catch glimpses of him chatting with Emma in the front yard, or walking by with a casual wave. Sometimes, I'd hear his voice carrying over the fence, and then Emma's laugh. A little too high-pitched, a little too familiar. I kept telling myself that it was harmless, that Emma and I had been through tougher times together. We had a strong foundation, but the way Dylan inserted himself into our lives was beginning to gnaw at me. One evening, I came home from work a little early. I was hoping to surprise Emma, maybe take her out for dinner. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Dylan's car parked in front of his place, and a strange flash of irritation ran through me. Shaking it off, I went inside. "Emma?" I called out, expecting to hear her voice from the kitchen, but there was silence. I walked through the house and found her sitting in the living room, her face lit up by the soft glow of her phone. She looked up and smiled, but I noticed a slight stiffness in her expression, like she hadn't expected me home so soon. "Hey, babe," she said, putting her phone down. "Home early?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Thought we could grab a bite together." Emma's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered, nodding eagerly. "Of course, just let me get ready." She got up and headed to our bedroom, and as she walked away, her phone buzzed with a new message. I saw Dylan's name flash across the screen. I pretended not to notice, telling myself it was none of my business. But that tiny knot in my stomach tightened a little more. Over dinner, Emma seemed distracted, her gaze flitting to her phone every few minutes. I asked her if everything was all right, and she assured me it was. "Just some group chat stuff," she said, brushing it off. I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. The following weekend, I noticed an odd new pattern. When I left for work, Dylan's car would be parked in his driveway, and Emma would wave me off with a bright smile. But later, on my lunch break, I'd check my phone and see pictures of them together in her social media stories, showing Dylan stopping by our house for coffee. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself that Emma was just being friendly, that Dylan was lonely in a new neighborhood. Yet the feeling of unease continued to grow. One evening, I finally brought it up. "Hey, you and Dylan seem to be getting close," I said, keeping my tone as casual as possible. "I've seen him around a lot lately." Emma rolled her eyes, laughing. "Oh, come on, he's harmless. Just being neighborly. Besides, I thought you trusted me." Her words stung, but I forced a smile. "Of course I trust you. It's just, he's around an awful lot, you know?" Emma sighed, her gaze softening as she reached out to take my hand. "Babe, you have nothing to worry about. He's just a friend. If it bothers you, I can keep a little more distance." Her reassurance should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Something about the way she said "just a friend" felt wrong, like she was telling herself as much as she was telling me. I left it at that, not wanting to come across as paranoid. But the next day, as I sat at work, I found myself obsessively checking my phone. I'd grown increasingly aware of my own restlessness, the subtle ache in my chest whenever I thought about Dylan and Emma's easy laughter. They were both just too comfortable. Then one day, during a lunch break, I opened Instagram and saw something that made my heart sink. Emma had posted a picture of 2 coffee cups side by side on our dining table with the caption, "Coffee time with my favorite neighbor." It was innocuous, a casual post, but to me it felt like a betrayal. Wasn't I supposed to be her favorite person? I found myself questioning every small gesture, every moment they'd shared. When I got home that night, I brought it up again, only this time with more of an edge in my voice. "You know, Emma, if I didn't know any better, I'd say you and Dylan are spending a lot of time together." Emma bristled, giving me a look of frustration. "Tom, are we really going to do this again? You're acting like I'm cheating on you or something. He's a neighbor and we have coffee sometimes. Is that such a crime?" The defensiveness in her voice only made me feel worse, but I didn't want to fight. "No, it's not a crime," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "It's just, I'd like it if you kept our relationship more private. That's all." Emma sighed, shaking her head. "You're being ridiculous, Tom, but if it makes you feel better, fine. I'll dial it back." She said the words, but her tone was icy, and I could tell she didn't mean it. That night, I lay awake, wondering when things had started to feel so wrong. Emma had always been warm and open with me, but ever since Dylan showed up, she seemed to be slipping away, inch by inch. I was losing her to a man I barely knew, and the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it. As the days wore on, my suspicions deepened, and it became harder to ignore the nagging feeling that something was happening behind my back. Emma seemed distant, almost as if she were living in a world apart from me. Whenever I brought up Dylan's name, she would roll her eyes, dismissing me as if I were being paranoid. Then one afternoon, I decided to test my theory. I pretended to leave for work as usual, even saying goodbye to Emma with a quick kiss and a wave. But instead of heading to the office, I parked a few blocks away, out of sight, and walked back, positioning myself behind the hedges lining our yard where I had a clear view of the house. My heart pounded as I waited, hoping that my gut feeling was wrong, praying that I would end up laughing at my own foolishness. An hour passed. Nothing. Maybe I was wrong. But then, just as I was about to head back to my car, I saw him, Dylan, strolling down the street with his easy confidence, heading straight for our front door. He didn't even knock. He just let himself in like he belonged there, like he had every right to be in my home with my wife. My blood boiled. I waited, torn between storming in and confronting them on the spot and waiting to see what unfolded. Part of me still wanted to believe that I was jumping to conclusions, that there was an innocent explanation for everything. But as the minutes ticked by, my patience thinned. After what felt like an eternity, I approached the house. My hands were shaking as I put my ear to the front door, straining to hear any sounds from inside. I heard laughter, muffled voices, and then silence. My mind raced, imagining the worst possible scenarios. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I opened the door as quietly as possible, stepping inside with careful, measured steps. The house was eerily quiet, except for a faint rustling sound coming from upstairs. The sound of whispered voices, followed by more laughter. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. They were upstairs, in my bedroom. I moved silently up the stairs, each step fueling my anger. When I reached the top, I saw that the bedroom door was slightly ajar. Through the small crack, I caught a glimpse of Dylan and Emma sitting on the edge of the bed, their heads close together, as if sharing some intimate secret. The sight made me feel sick to my stomach, but I held myself back, needing undeniable proof before I confronted them. Then I saw it. A used condom wrapper on the nightstand, carelessly left in plain sight. My chest tightened as everything became crystal clear. They weren't just friends. My worst suspicions had been confirmed. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I pushed the door open, and they both looked up in shock. Emma's face turned pale, her eyes wide with horror. Dylan, on the other hand, just gave me that cocky smile, as if daring me to do something about it. "Tom," Emma stammered, scrambling off the bed. It's not what it looks like." But the lie was too obvious, too blatant. I could see the guilt written all over her face. She had betrayed me, broken our vows, and for what? A few stolen moments with a man she barely knew? Dylan stood up, hands raised in a mocking gesture of surrender. "Hey, man," he said with a smirk. "Maybe if you'd been around more often, she wouldn't have come to me." His words stung, and I felt a surge of rage course through me. I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw. He stumbled back, surprised, but then he quickly recovered, throwing a punch that landed squarely on my shoulder. We grappled, fists flying, as Emma screamed, pleading for us to stop. The fight moved through the room, knocking over furniture and shattering a mirror. I barely felt the blows he landed on me. All I could focus on was the betrayal that Emma had chosen him over me. Finally, I managed to pin him against the wall, my fist raised to deliver another blow. But before I could strike, Emma threw herself between us, her face streaked with tears. "Tom, stop. Please, just stop. It's over. We're done." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. In that moment, I realized that she had made her choice, and it wasn't me. The life we'd built together, the trust we'd shared, It was all gone, shattered beyond repair. I let go of Dylan, stepping back as a hollow emptiness settled in my chest. Emma looked at me, a mixture of guilt and defiance in her eyes. She didn't apologize. She didn't even try to explain. She just stood there, as if waiting for me to leave. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, feeling as if a part of me had died. The house I'd once called home now felt like a prison, filled with memories that I could never escape. Leaving the house, I felt the cold, unforgiving evening air hit me. I kept walking, barely noticing where I was going. My mind was numb, replaying those last moments over and over. Emma, the woman I had built my life around, had chosen a man she barely knew over our years together. The betrayal was like a wound, raw and unrelenting. I found myself at a nearby park, sitting on a bench, trying to process what had happened. How could this be real? I'd been working tirelessly, sacrificing so much for us, thinking we were a team. My chest ached with the weight of it all. I wanted to scream, to cry, to find a way to erase the hurt, but nothing made it easier. As the hours passed, I watched as the streetlights blinked on, casting long shadows over the empty playground. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen. It was a message from my best friend, Jared. I told him about my suspicions, but he had always reassured me, reminding me of Emma's loyalty. Now he would know the truth just like I did. Taking a deep breath, I texted Jared to meet me at the bar we used to hang out at in college. I needed someone to talk to help me make sense of the wreckage. Within 20 minutes, Jared was there, and his presence brought a sense of comfort I hadn't realized I needed. "Tom, man, what happened?" he asked, his face etched with concern as we sat down. I took a long sip of my drink before answering, the alcohol barely numbing the pain. "You were right about Dylan. He was all over her, and she didn't push him away." I told him everything, the scene in the bedroom, the condom wrapper, and the smug look on Dylan's face. Jared listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each detail. "That's messed up, Tom," he said, clenching his fists. "You don't deserve this." "No one does," I muttered, feeling drained. "But what am I supposed to do now? Go back to that house? Pretend like it never happened?" Jared shook his head. "No way, man. You need to get out of there. Stay with me if you want. But don't go back to that mess tonight. She's the one who betrayed you. Let her sit with that." The anger started to simmer again, but this time it was different. I wasn't just angry at Dylan or at Emma. I was furious at myself for trusting them, for believing in something that wasn't real. I slammed my glass down, causing a few heads to turn, but Jared didn't flinch. He just watched me, waiting for me to decide what came next. "Let's go back," I said finally. "I'm done letting them think they can walk all over me." Fueled by a mix of rage and bitter resolve, I found myself back in front of the house. Jared parked his truck at the curb, glancing at me with a serious, almost cautious look. "Are you sure you want to do this tonight, Tom?" he asked, his voice low. "Emotions are high. Just don't do something you'll regret." I forced a bitter smile, feeling the knot of anger and betrayal twist tighter. "I have to face this, Jared. I can't let them think they got away with this. I need answers. Closure." As we walked up the path to the door, I could see lights still glowing from the living room windows. They were both inside, probably lounging around without a second thought for the damage they'd done. I was done pretending, done letting them make a fool of me. I reached the door, took a deep breath, and let myself in. The moment I stepped through the doorway, I saw them. Emma and Dylan sitting on the couch, wrapped up in a hushed conversation. They froze the second they saw me, their expressions shifting from surprise to something I couldn't quite place. Emma's face went pale, and Dylan, he had that same cocky smirk from before. "Tom," Emma stammered, standing up, her hands fidgeting nervously. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I laughed bitterly. "I think the better question is, what are you doing here, Emma? Or rather, what have you been doing behind my back with him?" Dylan shrugged, looking far too comfortable for a man who had just been caught. "Look, Tom, I don't know what you think you saw, but don't, I snapped, cutting him off. I saw enough. I saw everything, Dylan. And Emma, you didn't even try to hide it. Emma's face twisted in confusion, her voice trembling. Tom, please, can't we talk about this calmly? Calmly? I couldn't believe her nerve. She stood there as if she were the victim, as if this were just some minor misunderstanding. You betrayed me, Emma. You threw away our entire marriage, and for what? Him. Dylan chuckled, his smirk widening. Maybe if you weren't such a boring husband, she wouldn't have needed someone else to keep her entertained. His words were like gasoline on an open flame, and before I knew it, I lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar. You think this is funny? I snarled, pulling him close. You think you can just walk into my life and take everything from me? Dylan struggled, his smug look faltering as he tried to pry my hands off him. Tom, man, calm down. Emma cried out, stepping back, her hands covering her mouth. Tom, stop. Just let him go, please. But I was beyond reasoning. All the hurt, all the humiliation, it all boiled over. You did this, Emma? I spat, letting go of Dylan with a shove. You made your choice. You turned your back on everything we built, everything we promised each other. Emma took a shaky breath, her voice barely a whisper. Tom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get this far. It just happened. I laughed. A cold, empty sound. It just happened? That's the best you can come up with. I turned to Dylan, who was watching the exchange with narrowed eyes, clearly not expecting things to spiral this way. And you? I said, my voice dripping with contempt. You're nothing but a parasite. You latch on to anything you can take from others, and for what? Just to prove you can. He scoffed, brushing himself off. Spare me the lecture, Tom. You didn't appreciate what you had, and now someone else does. Deal with it. His arrogance sent a fresh wave of rage through me, but Jared stepped in, putting a firm hand on my shoulder. Tom, he's not worth it, he murmured. They're both not worth it. Dylan crossed his arms, leaning back with a satisfied grin. You heard him, Tom. Get out. Emma and I have plans. Emma shot him a nervous look, as if she were finally realizing the consequences of her actions. But I was done trying to make her see what she'd thrown away. I turned and headed for the door, with Jared following close behind. But just before I left, I looked over my shoulder one last time. Good luck, Emma. You've made your choice. Don't expect me to be there when you realize what a mistake you've made. The finality of my words seemed to sink in, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret flash across her face. But it was too late. She'd already made her bed, and now she'd have to lie in it, beside the man she thought was worth more than everything we'd built together. Walking away from that house, I felt a mix of exhaustion and anger. Each step felt like a weight, pressing down on me, as if everything I'd held onto for years had been stripped away in one night. Jared walked silently beside me, offering his support without needing to say a word. He knew there was nothing he could say that would make this hurt any less. We reached his truck, and I leaned against it, staring back at the house that once held my entire life. My home, my family, my marriage. All of it had crumbled, and I had no idea where to go from here. I ran a hand through my hair, taking deep breaths to calm myself. I'm sorry, man, Jared said quietly, his eyes filled with sympathy. You didn't deserve this. No one does. I nodded, grateful for his support. Thanks for being here, Jared. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Tom. You'll get through this. It's going to be hell, but you'll come out the other side. I wasn't so sure. Everything felt surreal, as if I were floating through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But I knew one thing: I couldn't go back. I couldn't just pretend that things were normal, not after what I'd seen and heard. Jared insisted that I stay at his place for the night, and I reluctantly agreed. The idea of being alone in my empty home was too much to bear. We drove back to his apartment in silence, the events of the evening replaying over and over in my mind. I knew sleep would be impossible, but the exhaustion weighed on me all the same. When we arrived at his place, Jared set me up on the couch with some blankets and a pillow, doing his best to make me comfortable. He left me a glass of water and a few words of encouragement before heading off to his own room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the reality of my situation sinking in. I had trusted Emma with everything, believed in our future together, and she had thrown it all away for a man she barely knew. The betrayal was a wound that I knew would take a long time to heal, but for now, all I could feel was the sting of the loss. Hours passed, and as dawn began to creep in through the window, I finally drifted into a restless sleep. My dreams were filled with fragments of the life I thought I'd had, images of Emma and me in happier times, now tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. Woke up to the faint glow of morning filtering through the blinds, my head pounding as the reality of the night before settled back into place. Jared's couch was a reminder that I wasn't home. Not that I had a home anymore, not in the way I used to think of it. Sitting up, I noticed Jared had left a fresh pot of coffee brewing, with a note beside it that read, "Take your time. I'll be back later." I was grateful for his kindness, though a part of me ached with the need to be alone with my thoughts. The coffee offered a small comfort, but I felt like a stranger in my own life, each sip serving as a reminder of the bitter taste of betrayal. I scrolled through my phone, a part of me expecting a message from Emma, but there was nothing. The emptiness hit hard. It was as though she'd severed ties without looking back. A week ago, I wouldn't have believed it possible. Now, the silence was deafening. My mind drifted to what came next. The idea of returning to that house, to the reminders of what Emma and I once had, seemed unbearable. But I knew I couldn't run from it forever. I had to face it, face her, and pick up whatever pieces were left of my life. Later that day, Jared returned, noticing the exhaustion in my face. "Tom, have you thought about what you want to do now?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "I don't know," I admitted. "Everything feels shattered. I can't even imagine going back to that place." Jared nodded, understanding. "You don't have to rush into anything. Take things one step at a time. If you want, I can come with you to grab some of your things." "Yeah, I think that would help." The idea of returning to the house alone was daunting, but having Jared by my side gave me a small sense of security. A few hours later, we pulled up in front of the house. The memories from last night flooded back, but I forced myself to stay focused. I needed to get through this one step at a time. Inside, the silence was suffocating. It was as if the walls themselves held the memory of last night's confrontation. I made my way to the bedroom, carefully packing a few essentials, trying to ignore the empty bed and the spaces Emma had once filled in my life. As I packed, I noticed a framed photo of us from our honeymoon, the one where we were smiling, full of love and optimism. I stared at it, feeling a pang of sorrow and anger. In a sudden surge of frustration, I threw the frame into the trash. It felt symbolic, a release of everything I'd held onto for so long. Just as I was finishing up, the front door opened, and there was Emma, her face drawn with an expression I couldn't quite read. I straightened up, bracing myself for the inevitable conversation. "Tom," she began, her voice soft, hesitant. "I didn't expect to see you here." I took a deep breath, determined to keep my composure. "I came to get some of my things. I didn't expect to run into you either." She looked down, fidgeting with her hands. I wanted to talk. "I know things got out of hand, and I never meant to hurt you like this." I scoffed, unable to hide the bitterness. "Emma, you did more than just hurt me. You destroyed everything we built together. And for what? A fling with the neighbor." Her face fell, guilt flashing in her eyes. "It wasn't just a fling, Tom. I don't even know how to explain it. I was feeling lost, like something was missing in our lives." "Something was missing?" I repeated, incredulous. "And your solution was to throw away our marriage? To betray me?" Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too raw. "I'm sorry, Tom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I never meant for it to go this far." I stared at her, feeling the weight of everything she'd taken from me. "It's too late, Emma. I'm done." And with that, I walked past her, leaving behind the remnants of a life I once thought was unbreakable. I couldn't even look at Emma as I left that house for the last time. The door slammed behind me, the sound echoing in the silence. There was no going back. No more pretending that everything would be okay. The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the feeling of losing myself in all of it. Of losing everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust. Jared drove me back to his place again. This time, I didn't say much. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything, but the pieces didn't fit together anymore. How could I have been so blind? How did I not see what was happening right under my nose? When we got to Jared's apartment, he didn't try to offer any more words of encouragement. He knew that nothing anyone said would fix this. But he did make sure I ate something, forcing me to sit down at the table with him as he cracked open a beer. "Man," Jared said after a long pause, "you've got to stop blaming yourself. She's the one who made those choices, not you. You don't owe her anything now." I nodded, though I didn't feel any relief from his words. It wasn't about blame. It was about the years of trust, the years of being a partner, and how easily it all crumbled. That night, I hardly slept. I tossed and turned on Jared's couch, my mind racing, my thoughts jumping from one thing to the next. The emptiness in my chest seemed endless. It was like everything that had once defined me, my home, my marriage, my sense of stability, had just been ripped away. And now I was standing at the edge of an abyss, unsure of how to even begin rebuilding. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed at Jared's for the most part, not sure where else to go. I spent a lot of time walking around the city, just trying to clear my head. But every corner I turned, every shop I passed, seemed to carry a memory of Emma. It was impossible to escape the ghosts of what I thought my life was supposed to be. At one point, I ran into an old friend from work, Steve. He was shocked when he saw me, and I could tell he wanted to ask what was going on. But he didn't. Instead, he invited me out for a drink. We ended up at a local bar, Steve's way of trying to distract me. The alcohol helped numb the pain, but only temporarily. After a few rounds, Steve leaned in and asked, "Tom, you want to talk about it? I know you're going through a lot right now, but it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to carry this alone." I stared at him for a long moment and then finally said, "It's not about carrying it alone. It's about knowing what comes next. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do now." Steve nodded, his expression softening. "You'll figure it out, man. You always do. And maybe it's time to move forward. Leave the past behind, start something new." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that everything would eventually be okay, that I'd wake up one day and feel normal again. But that day hadn't come yet. The next morning, I went back to the house to collect more of my things, trying to avoid the painful memories that still lingered. Emma was gone when I arrived, probably off seeing Dylan or doing whatever it was she'd chosen over me. There was no apology, no more pleading, nothing. Just the emptiness of the house that had once felt like home. As I sorted through what was left of my life in that place, some clothes, a few books, random items that once mattered, I realized something. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to be blind to her unhappiness, to our relationship's flaws. I wasn't blameless in this. I grabbed the last of my things, feeling like I was finally severing the last ties to my old life. But I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The man I'd been before seemed like a stranger. Maybe I was still that man deep down, but the layers of hurt and confusion had obscured him. That afternoon, I sat down with Jared again, still processing everything. I was tired of feeling lost. "I don't know who I am anymore, Jared. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do." "You're still you, Tom," Jared said, his voice firm. "You just need to remember that. This is just a setback. A huge one, but just a setback." I didn't believe him, but I nodded anyway, not ready to admit that I wasn't sure how to move forward. The pain was still too raw, the wounds too deep, but I had to find a way to heal. I had to, for my own sake. The days bled together. I barely recognized the man I saw in the mirror anymore. I didn't know what was worse, the pain of Emma's betrayal or the overwhelming sense of loss that seemed to consume me from the inside out. Each day felt like an eternity, and each night was just another reminder that the life I had once taken for granted was gone. Jared did his best to keep me from sinking too deep into the darkness. He'd check in on me, drag me out for walks or to grab a meal, but there was only so much he could do. The reality of what I'd lost kept clawing at me, even in the brief moments of distraction. I spent a lot of time thinking about Emma, about what had gone wrong. I tried to remember when things had started to shift, when I'd stopped being the man she needed, when I'd become just another person she could easily betray. But the truth was, I hadn't seen it coming. She'd hid it so well, pretending everything was fine, and I'd been too blinded by my own trust to notice the cracks in our relationship. I had tried everything to make her happy. I had worked hard, been there for her, for us, but in the end, it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Jared's words lingered in my mind. This is just a setback. He had said that like it was simple, like it was something I could just overcome. But how could I, when everything I thought I knew had crumbled beneath me? One night I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to confront the one person who could explain it all, Emma. It wasn't enough to walk away without hearing her side, even if I didn't believe she could justify what she'd done. But I had to know. I had to hear her tell me, in her own words, why she'd destroyed everything. I grabbed my car keys and drove to the house. The place felt more foreign with every passing day. It wasn't just the empty rooms. It was the absence of her. It was the haunting reminder that what we had was over, gone forever. I stood in front of the house for a long time before finally stepping inside. It was just as empty as the last time I'd been here, but this time, it felt different. It felt like a tomb, a place where something had died, something precious and irreplaceable. I didn't know what I expected when I walked into the kitchen, but there she was, Emma, sitting at the table, her face pale, her eyes red. She looked as broken as I felt, but it didn't make me feel any better. I wasn't here for sympathy or apologies anymore. I was here for answers. "Tom," she whispered when she saw me, her voice trembling. "I didn't think you'd come back." "I needed to," I said flatly. "I need to know why. Why did you do it, Emma? Why did you betray me like that?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her face. "I never meant to hurt you, Tom. It just happened. Dylan, he's not just some fling. I thought he was what I needed, someone who could make me feel alive again." I clenched my fists, fighting back the rage that burned inside me. Alive? Was this how she had to feel alive, by destroying everything? By breaking us? "You thought that cheating on me with him would make you feel better?" I spat, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. "You had a family, Emma, a life that we built together, and you threw it all away for a feeling, for some sick, selfish need." Her hands shook as she wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry. I know what I did was wrong, but it wasn't about him. It was about me. I didn't know who I was anymore. I lost myself somewhere along the way, and I was trying to find a way out." The anger inside me grew, twisting like a knot in my stomach. "You lost yourself? And you thought the answer was to destroy me? To destroy us?" She stood up, moving closer to me, her voice desperate. "I never wanted to hurt you, Tom, I swear. But I didn't know how to fix myself without breaking everything else." I couldn't listen to her anymore. I didn't care about her excuses, her pain, her guilt. She had made her choice, and now there was no going back. I turned away, my body trembling with the effort to keep my composure. But the rage was too much. I stormed out of the kitchen, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair, heading for the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard her cry out behind me. "Tom, please, don't go. We can still fix this." I paused for a second, but the words were hollow, empty promises. I turned the handle and stepped outside, slamming the door behind me. The world felt cold, and my heart felt colder still. I had just walked away from everything I thought I knew about love, about trust, about who I was. But I knew there was no other choice. Not after everything she'd done. As I drove away, The weight of what had happened hit me with full force. There was no fixing this. There was no way back to the life I had once known. It was gone, and there was no escaping that truth. But there was something else, something I hadn't quite grasped until now. I was still alive, and I didn't know what that meant yet, or what I was supposed to do with it. But I knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, it would be up to me. To pick up the pieces, to heal, to move forward, even if it felt like the hardest thing I would ever have to do. The next few weeks were a blur of numbness and forced movements. I stayed at Jared's place not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. My old life felt like a distant memory, a story I no longer had any part in. Emma had sent texts, emails, even called a few times, but I ignored them all. I couldn't bring myself to listen to her anymore. I was done. I'd walk through the city streets, the cold air biting at my skin, trying to make sense of what had happened. I couldn't escape the echoes of our life, the laughter, the quiet moments at home, the way she'd always smiled when I walked through the door. It was all gone. And for what? For some empty affair with Dylan? A temporary escape from whatever unhappiness had festered in her heart? One night, I was sitting in a bar alone, trying to drink away the bitterness that clung to me. Jared had given me some space for the past couple of days, which was probably for the best. I didn't want anyone around, not really. I didn't want their pity, their well-meaning advice, or their attempts to make me feel better. I just wanted to be left alone with my thoughts, which were becoming darker by the day. As I stared into my drink, I heard a familiar voice. "Tom? Is that you?" I looked up, half expecting it to be one of the guys from work, but instead, it was Rachel, Jared's ex-girlfriend. She was wearing a tight red dress, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, looking as if nothing had changed in her world. She had always been confident, unbothered, but there was something in her eyes now that I couldn't place. I hadn't seen her in months. "Rachel," I said, my voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" She sat down across from me without waiting for an invitation. "I could ask you the same thing. Jared told me what happened." She said it casually, but her gaze was sharp. "You doing okay?" I shook my head. "No, I'm not doing okay." "I can see that," she replied, her tone softening. "But you don't have to do this to yourself, Tom. You can get out of this. You just have to let go. Let go." Those words hung in the air like a challenge. How could I let go of something that had been my entire world for so long? How could I just walk away from everything, from the life I'd built, from the dreams we'd shared? Felt impossible. "You don't understand," I muttered, taking another swig of my drink. "You haven't been where I am." She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Maybe not, but I've seen this before, Tom. I've seen people destroy themselves over things that aren't worth it. You can either stay in the pit or you can climb out. But it's your choice." I wanted to yell at her, to tell her that she didn't know anything about my pain, but something in her words struck a chord. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been holding on to something that was never meant to be. But even as I thought that, the weight of the betrayal still gnawed at me, the sense of being discarded, betrayed by the one person I thought I could trust. "I don't know how," I admitted, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Rachel's expression softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something human in her. She wasn't just the confident woman she portrayed herself as. She had her own scars, her own battles. "You don't have to know how right now. Just know that you can start. And it starts with you. Not with her, not with anyone else. Just you." I stared at her for a long time, unsure of how to respond. She was offering me something I hadn't considered, a way forward, even if I didn't have all the answers. It was strange, though. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been holding on to Emma, to the past, because I was terrified of being alone. But maybe being alone was the only way I could start to rebuild. "I don't know if I can," I said, my voice small. "Then take it one day at a time," Rachel said, standing up. "But don't stay stuck in this. You're better than that, Tom." As she left, I sat there for a long time, contemplating her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe the only way out of this was to stop clinging to the past and start looking forward, even if the future seemed uncertain and terrifying. But the road ahead wasn't easy. It was going to be full of pain, of confronting the darkest parts of myself and my history. And there would be no easy fixes, no shortcuts to healing. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something, hope, maybe, possibility that things could be different. The next morning, I woke up early, before the sun had even fully risen. I found myself standing in front of the mirror, taking a long, hard look at the man who stared back at me. I was broken, yes, but I was still here. Maybe I wasn't ready to forget, but I was ready to begin again.